So, there you are, facing 500 guests at a wedding as they await your solo in honor of the bride. There you are, several thousand feet above the ground, on the outside of an airplane, about to let go and leap into thin air. There you are, facing a panel of experts who will decide whether you deserve the degree you've been working on for years. There you are on the back of an animal on a bucking chute, waiting for the gate to open, when you know the animal's only intent is to get you off its back. There you are on the final turn of a pace lap in your very first officially sanctioned car race. There you are facing two oncologists who, after first confirming that you do in fact have cancer and about 1 month to live if you do nothing, await your answer on what you're going to do next. What do you intend to do? Now, each of you had a unique reaction as you pictured yourself in any of those situations. Some benign, some visceral. And your reaction was based largely on the experiences you've had up to this point. If you're a professional singer, the first one was no big deal. But maybe you got a little nervous about hanging on to the outside of an airplane. We make thousands of decisions every day, mostly with complete confidence and without consequence. Not because they lack importance, but because we are absolutely confident in how to handle them. Most of them are tiny, some are bigger. If you were to look at it graphically, the trajectory of your confidence would be roughly inversely proportional to the substance of the challenge or the decision. And what we have done in our past, and now we have assimilated those things, is what guides our confidence. It's the base of our confidence. My name's Ben Ochs. I work with boards of directors, CEOs, presidents, their executive teams on their effectiveness as leaders and as teams, and that effect on their corporation and their bottom line. And I approach it pragmatically. What we're going to talk about today is something that's important to me, that is interesting to me, and that can really help leaders of all types at all levels, even those who are not in an obvious leadership role. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the paradox of confidence. That being that, like money, in and of itself, it's not good or bad. It's what we bring to it that determines its value. We're going to talk about how to recognize it in others. And we're going to talk about what to watch for in ourselves when it comes to how confidence manifests itself in us. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to talk about me a little bit. Home, work, education, personal experiences, life. Not as a biopic, but as a framework for you to think about the same sort of progression in your life and how it has influenced, or those experiences have influenced your confidence and how you define confidence. So, a little bit about me. Home, growing up, was a 17,000 acre cattle ranch, 4 siblings and both parents, and loads of experience. The ranch introduced me to labor. Real labor, the kind where you sweat and you get sore and you want to stop, but you can't. We had cattle, and what we learned from cattle was that when you're driving them, cows are different than bulls. You know, the gender thing. Mother cows, as we called them, were different than heifers. Heat of the day versus cool. One reason we were up before dawn was because we needed to get out to start moving cattle before it got hot, because once it got hot, they wanted to do nothing but get under a tree. It made it much more difficult. And of course, we had to brand them, castrate them, and do all those sorts of things too. Great experience. But it taught me a little bit about what I can and can't do, what I'm good at, what I can handle, what turns my stomach and what doesn't. There were lots of machinery, getting familiar with machinery, mechanical things, how things work, what doesn't work, how to deal with them when they have problems. Thinking. The ranch provided a lot of opportunity to think. There were times, hours and hours in a day, when you'd be on a horse or fixing fence or operating a piece of machinery and there was no distraction. You had to pay attention to what you were doing, but there was no outside distraction. So thinking about what was important, what was the basis of the philosophy, your approach to life, your plans, there was lots of time for that, which is, I think, unusual now that I'm raising my kids in a city. I had 4 siblings. I was the 4th of the first 5, and I'll explain that a little later, the 3rd of 3 boys. And the reason I mention that is because birth order has something to do with how you view yourself. And when you have 5 kids born in a 4.5-year span, and no twins, there tends to be a fair amount of competition, especially when there are no neighbors. You are your own team, you're your own distraction and entertainment. So that made a big difference. And how they're developing and how they see themselves and then in turn treat you makes a difference. So if you're the oldest or the youngest, etc. My parents were both born in North Portland, a block and a half from each other. They grew up. And my dad was the son of you'd call him an entrepreneur, I guess. He sold things, he worked for the railroad, eventually started an oil distributorship. You may have heard of Acorn Oil, orange trucks. That was my grandfather's company. Acorn, a take on our name, even though Ochs is spelled O-C-H-S, oak tree, acorn. So we were joked about as little acorns. My mother was the daughter of a meat grader. My grandfather worked in a meat packing plant for Armour & Company, and they were the stable ones. They had a good, solid, steady job. But she was the 3rd of the first 3 of my grandmother's children and the only girl. So she was taken from the city, where she was the only girl in a family and the youngest, to literally the middle of nowhere, or the far edge of it. No neighbors, no help. 5 kids in a very short period of time. So that was a big change for her and a big challenge. My father started working at Columbia Edgewater Golf Course at the age of 12 and worked there for 13 years. And then was a fighter pilot in the Air Force. He flew F-86s in the Korean conflict, and he likes to tell me about the performance of the F-86 being the first jet in service as a fighter. He said if you went to its service ceiling of roughly 50,000 feet and pointed it straight down, wide open, you could break the sound barrier with just enough time to pull out before you meet a different kind of boom. Now, of course, they have fighter jets that can break the sound barrier going straight up. But that was his experience. And then they took risks. I told you about my mother's. But my dad, being raised in the middle of Portland, at the age of 28, bought a 17,000-acre ranch. Now that I'm past that age, I know, it surprises you. I actually am. I think about, man, you know, the previous 5 or 6 owners of that ranch failed. And there was a lot of money changing hands in the form of friendly bets over there that he would be out in 6 months. Well, that was 1958. He still lives there. I still visit them, so he did a good job. Experience. I was 10 years old. My brothers were 11 and 12 when my father said, you can have that car, a 1956 Ford, if you can replace the clutch in it. The clutch had gone out. Anybody know what 3 on the tree is? Okay, manual transmission with the gear shift on the column. So there we were, the 3 boys, 10, 11, and 12, with this 56 Ford up on blocks, and we pulled the transmission, replaced the clutch, got it running, and we had our first car. And we drove it around. That's where we got our driving experience to begin with. We drove it around the ranch and had fun and did all kinds of things we shouldn't have. But that was a big part of our development. We had dirt bikes. And then at the age of 16, April 25th, 1979, about 1 month before my next older brother, Nels, was to graduate from high school, he was killed in a car accident at our driveway. His best friend rear-ended him. And because we lived on a highway, so out in the country. That was a big deal. It had an influence on me, on how temporal our lives are. Now that I'm a father, I appreciate more what my parents went through in that time. And I've always felt for his best friend, who has to live with that, who was drinking when they had the accident. Not only that, my mother was 48. She was also 9 months pregnant. And 2 weeks later, had my little brother, Charlie, and he was 2 weeks overdue. He just turned 30, May 9th this year. So that, when I talked about birth order and that sort of thing, the first 5 were all bunched up, and then 15 years later, she had another boy. So, work. I mentioned the ranch. At 14 years of age, I was asked by my mother if I'd be interested in working for someone else. I thought, of course. All I've done is, you're out here in the middle of nowhere, you're working hard and all that stuff. It sounds great. What is it? Well, for $2.30 an hour, I could go in and work for the local mortician. He needed somebody to vacuum and clean windows and dust caskets and that sort of thing. Well, the first day, we went and picked up a case, as we called them, that came in from Minnesota. And that was an interesting experience. But my main point is that at the age of 14, I was asked on a number of occasions to sew up autopsies. So the pathologist would come in when they didn't know the cause of death, of course, do an autopsy, oftentimes cranial and torso. And the two doctors, often two doctors who wanted to know what happened, they were the ones who were on call and couldn't save the person, would be there. Sometimes a mortician. And we'd stand around the prep table and they would go through the organs of the body, find out what was wrong as best they could, and then they'd leave. And the mortician would say, well, can you take care of that? So he'd give me a great big curved needle with some household string, and so I'd take care of that. So that was a job at 14 and 15 years old. But I learned a lot about things there, anatomy, how to deal with clients. Then I lived in Hawaii, taught high school there, coached, worked as a valet and managed a windsurfing shop, taught people how to windsurf. Then moved back to Oregon and taught high school in Hood River. At the same time that I owned 2 retail stores, one in Hood River and one in the Dalles. And I learned a lot about how to manage a business and what's involved in it. You know what the main thing was I learned at that age? I was 24. Don't be in business doing something that you aren't interested in. You want to know what my business was? Somebody say yes. Women's clothing. I learned that I have no interest in women's clothing. I was interested in being in business, so I did it, and it was really interesting in that regard, but I wasn't passionate about it. Plus, I was also teaching school and coaching, so time was a little bit of a crunch, but I wasn't married yet, and I could devote myself to it. Then I worked in Iowa for a while. I worked as a CFO in a venture capital company, and then started my consulting business in Iowa, and eventually moved back here in December of '06. High school in Madras, Oregon. How many know where Madras is? Okay, so you know it's desert, you know that a day like this is really great for me because I'm used to lots of sunshine and not so much used to the rain. But I only mentioned high school because I was student body president, I was an athlete, I was a musician and fairly involved there, although not because I was hungry for it, it just sort of happened. It's a small school. Went to Oregon State, 2 degrees from there, and then my last degree from Penn State. And then I would also consider as education flying. I had the distinction, I think the unique honor of soloing initially under Wally Olson. Even though my father's a certified instructor, he wisely chose to have me learn and have my first solo under someone else. Wally Olson flew out of Evergreen Airfield in Battle Ground, Washington. What's unique about Wally, there's lots of things, but the one I want to mention is that he had time in his logbook signed by one of the Wright brothers. And I don't know which one now, I don't remember, but when I learned to fly from him in the 80s, he was 80-something. And I think, you know, when you think about degrees of separation, that's 1 degree separation from the guys who started the whole thing. I think that's kind of cool. So I was, some personal experiences. I was born to a devout Catholic family, baptized at 6 days old, and I like to say, like Pat Gelsinger says, with full knowledge of the importance and impact of my decision. I'm just letting you know, I stole that from him, but it was, you know, that's the point. Later on, you know, made some choices on my own, discovered, you know, what made sense to me and how I wanted to follow my faith. But that was a very important influence. And my parents are still, they go to Catholic church very religiously, small r, I mean, very regularly. And I am often a defender of that. There are people who tend to make fun of or try to, you know, make Catholics the butt of their jokes, even Christians. And I make a point of saying, it's not our place. It was a great foundation for me. I want to mention my wife and kids, and I don't want to get overly personal here, but I think it's important that you know that now that you know I was raised on a ranch, out there in the middle of nowhere, that my wife is black. And that is a departure from our culture. It was surprising to my father, certainly, my mother less so. Absolutely the best decision I've ever made. One of the reasons that I think I was drawn to Penn State, where I met her, was because she was there. Brilliant woman, has her Ph.D. in agriculture. So not only are we the smallest percentage of union in the country, white man, black female, but we've got a black woman with a degree in a Ph.D. in agriculture. Unusual. Now her focus was youth development, and not production ag, but she has a lot of education in production ag as well. Lots of friends, lots of influences, life experiences, skydiving, skiing competitively, surfing. When speaking of confidence, I want you to picture this. I'm on the North Shore of Hawaii, out at sunset, and I'm paddling out to go surfing, and I'm paddling toward the group of people who are already out there, and I see them start to paddle aggressively toward the horizon, which is what you do when a set's coming in and it's big and you're a little too close, because the closer you are, the more likely you're going to get inside the break. And here's the, you know how you have memories that are just a snapshot and they're frozen? This is the frozen picture I have. I'm on my belly, right? And the wave is starting to feather, starting to rip, which means it's just about to pitch over and the top's kind of torn up. And I see 2 feet, the last guy to get over it. Okay, no big deal, except that day, the surf was 12 feet. And what you should know about 12 feet is that in Hawaii, waves are measured from the back and are typically twice as tall on the face as they are measured from the back. So what I was looking at was a roughly 20 to 24 foot wall of water right in front of me, the size of a 2-story building, about to come over. And when I knew I wasn't going to make it, I pitched my board, tried to dive down, didn't make it. It pulled me up. You know, if you look at a wave from the side, you know, cut in half, it's sort of got this shape. And I felt it lift me, and it took me right up through that and over the falls and worked me over. Great experience, though. I survived it. That was all the surfing I did that day. I just, because I came up just in time to get hit by another one, But I survived that. Flying, I talked about, mountain climbing, racing cars, business, serving on and chairing boards of directors, and then I mentioned briefly my cancer. So what does it have to do with confidence? Well, all those things have played a role in me deciding what I can do, what I can't do, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at, what I should be involved in, what I shouldn't be involved in. I've never been really, really out of shape, but when I finished my first bout with cancer, I was told that if I had to do a bone marrow transplant, which was what was supposed to happen, I should be physically strong. So I said, well, okay, I'll start doing push-ups again, I'll start doing some things. And I was mortified the first time I tried to do a push-up, and I could barely do one. I'd always been able to do push-ups. So I decided, this is part of the confidence thing, I said, okay, I'm just going to do one more push-up each time, each time I exercise. So even when I felt like I could do two more, I only did one more. And when I got to 100, without stopping, I quit adding them. But it wasn't because I set that goal. I just, took it in incremental steps. Add one thing at a time, something you can handle, and just keep, building on. So the ranch helped me with problem solving, hard work, security, the professional, physical, social, emotional, spiritual. The education helped me with the social aspect, the academic, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. I know now that even though I can do higher math, I don't like it. And maybe like when Bill Lattin's talking here, he's an engineer, a Ph.D. in engineering. Well, there's somebody who probably likes it, they're good at it, it's an aptitude. I'm not. So it's not just what I can and can't do, it's what I should be doing. What is an inordinate amount of energy devoted to something to achieve it when it makes no sense? I could spend a lot less energy achieving something else, while someone who has an aptitude for those things, this is part of leadership, you're giving it to someone who can, with much less effort and time, achieve the same results. Personally, those personal experiences really developed me relationally, maritally, personally, parentally, and even racially, culturally. I had to learn some things. And the life experience taught me most about trustworthiness. Not trust or trusting others, or even being trusted, but trustworthiness, being that aspect of yourself where you honor commitments to yourself. One thing that erodes our confidence is to intend to do something, expect to do something, and then fail ourselves when we know we haven't given it our best effort. So trustworthiness is a big part of it. And again, it's back to what can I do, what I can't do, what I should and shouldn't be doing, where my aptitudes lie. So as you pictured your own path, what were you doing in those stages of your life? You think about, what does that have to do with your confidence and how it shaped you? Well, certainty should be one of them. What we do and why we do it. So here's how a person's basis for confidence through good and bad experiences manifests itself in leadership. You have either bravado, which is a pretense of bravery. It's often masquerading as confidence. The stuffed shirt, the loud voice, the majority of one, that person who's, among other things, narcissistic. You have a handout that is now or should be coming around that has a list of things that tend to describe the characteristics or list the characteristics of bravado versus the other, which would be humility. And we're not talking about a meek, self-erosive or self-effacing approach to describing oneself. We're talking about a genuine strength of presence, real stability. It's based on knowing what you're about, what your values are, what your direction is, and knowing how you stay on that path, and when and how to meander from it. So look at the list there. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to call special attention to a few of them. Fear, specifically. Again, a masquerade of confidence. Very different than the calm of someone who is in an element that he or she is familiar with and knows about. What's my point? Well, it can be in any situation. Take a home. A person who is completely comfortable with entertaining people in his or her own home might be very uncomfortable being in that same setting in someone else's home, or being responsible for it in a more public setting. So context is important. But you know there's that sense of calm that makes other people, that gives other people a sense of calm. Narcissism. Not the I'm so in love with myself I can't quit looking at myself in the mirror kind of narcissism. Narcissism defined as others are only important so far as I can get something out of them. They can do something for me. That kind of narcissism. That's off-putting. As opposed to someone who's empathic, who really feels for other people, who knows that they're important because they're a person. This is part of having a spiritual base, a great faith base that convinces you that other people have value because of, oftentimes, their shortcomings. One thing that makes people interesting and unique is that they're not all the same. Remember when I talked about I have aptitudes that I should be investing myself in, and other people have aptitudes they should be investing in? Well, those differences can cause conflict, but they can also make people very interesting. A narcissist will tend to put off what the other person's differences are as inferior. If you put it on a plane, it would be this way, good or bad, better or worse, as opposed to it's just different. And that makes us rich. A confident person with genuine humility, genuine confidence, is able to see that and invite that. They don't block opposing views. Trustworthiness. Again, be accountable to commitments you make to yourself so that you may be effective with other people. If you see that I regularly fail myself in my commitments to me, you're less likely to commit to me. Be trustworthy first, then you'll be trusted. Look also at, under humility, the being prepared to be loved and hated. Gandhi, Jesus, Jack Welch, Joe Scarborough. I mean, name somebody who you know is both loved and hated. What's unique about those people? They know what they're about, or they knew what they were about. They set a direction. They didn't waver from it. They were happy to speak to it, and yet they were, well, not all of them, inclusive in that they were open to hearing other people's perception or perspective, and then saying, I understand, I see it differently. As opposed to just blocking. La, 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 you're not important to me because you don't see it the way I see it. I know, one of those guys kind of is in that last category, but you see what I'm saying? Be prepared to be loved and hated. What I'm saying is, especially as a leader, one of the worst things you can do for a foundation is to weather vane, is to waffle. Because as a follower, if I don't know that today you're going to handle this situation the same way you did yesterday, then I have one more pause in my commitment to action. One more pause in my investment in you. What does that do? It reduces productivity because all that slows down people's actions. So what are the effects we can expect from having confidence, being humble in the right way? We can expect loyalty, commitment, respect, peace of mind, clarity. We're not trying to guess what we should or shouldn't be doing all the time. We know. You know, I don't know this is true, and so you be free to shout me down here, but I have heard that Gandhi, speaking of him, never had a written contract, a written agreement. The reason was because he was so consistent and he knew so completely what he would and wouldn't do, and his reputation for doing that was so consistent that he didn't need it. If he said, well, no, I didn't say that, this is what I intended, then he was going to be supported. He was that consistent. Some people loved that, some people hated that, but he was effective. Wisdom, validation. These are all things that come from having a clear base, a clear direction, knowing your values, knowing what guides you and the direction you're going. They have predictable benefits. Better employees through discerned selection. You don't get fooled by gloss, glitter. You pick good people because your core is so stable you can see it in other people. So your employees are better because you make a better choice up front and you're better at developing them once they're there. Retained talent. Everybody wants great talent working with them and for them. Well, great talent is great in part because they have some of these characteristics. And if you're superficial and you have a hollow core, they'll find better places to be. So retained talent is one of the benefits. Strong relationships, both personal and professional. Good health. A good attitude with the absence of cynicism. Some people pride themselves on being cynics. I challenge you, if you're one of them, this way. Skepticism is a great skill, value, characteristic. Cynicism is skepticism with pessimism added in, and there's a negativity in that that isn't beneficial. Be skeptical. Be careful. Pay attention. But stop short of cynicism. Keep your attitude in check. You'll be healthier for it. Good health is one of the benefits. A strong support network. Who has my back? Well, they can be shaking your hand and smiling at you in the face, but they want to see you go, and if you trip, they're happy to see you fall. I know those are harsh words, but that is the truth. And yet you know people who you go out of your way. You would change your schedule to help them if something happened, wouldn't you? Because they're the kind of people you really admire and you want to emulate. Increased productivity. You, your staff, your reports, direct and dotted line, will be more productive. A more consistent and rewarding spiritual walk in life. If you're consistently breaching your commitments to yourself, it will erode your base. Be confident about it. If you're not sure, make sure you're around people who you do admire in that regard and ask them, talk to them, emulate them. Greater gains as a leader through unity among all those with whom you interact. Why? Once again, you're more influential. People trust you. They know that what you say is what you mean, and you will act on what you commit to, so they're willing to invest themselves in you. No one wants to go full speed and invest themselves completely in something and find out that they were directed the wrong way. And they have to undo it, back up, and go the other way. Once that happens a few times, then they get reluctant. They're reticent to take steps because they're not sure if they're going to be made a fool of again or waste a lot of energy in a direction that was unnecessary. The problems from a lack of it, that is a lack of genuine confidence, compound. Less confidence among the staff, slower response from the staff. Let me close this way. Yes, all those experiences that I opened with, the solo, the airplane, all that stuff, those were my experiences. I chose them for my life. They were significant, and there are lots of others, and you have lots of other ones that are probably more interesting, exciting, but they all were things that you recall, that shaped you, and they made a difference. That's what I want you to do. I want you to think about that, and I want you to think about how those things have played a role in your confidence and how it manifests itself in you, in your actions, your attitude, your interactions with others, and how it has shaped your definition of confidence, so that when you see it in others, you know whether it's a genuine confidence or some kind of a put on. Another point, just a statement. This is an Ochsism, so don't blame anyone else. But to systematize cynicism is to establish the ability to deny anything or to believe anything. Hitler, as an example, comes to mind. There was a cynical man, and he convinced almost an entire nation to do something that none of them would do individually. As a leader in an organization, you have a responsibility, but you also have a great opportunity to systematize a culture, a mindset, a view. To systematize cynicism. If you're a cynical leader, that will trickle down, and that will permeate the organization. Some people who are really solid and have all these characteristics, the good ones, and they are centered, will be a buffer between that cynicism and their direct reports. But most will be a conduit, and that'll be unfortunate. And then you can find yourself denying things. You won't hear ideas that could be very beneficial. Why? Because they're not mine. So be careful about that. True confidence is not a masquerade. It allows genuine humility and is behind great connections. The strongest friends you have are the friends with whom you can be you. Completely open, very little facade, and they to you. Those are great connections. Well, you can do that in business too. It's a risk, but that's part of being confident, is you take those risks. Why? What's the risk? The risk of being both loved and hated. It's also a marketing tenet. Be definitive, be clear, make a statement, and know that some people are going to fall outside the bounds of that definition. That's what you have to be prepared to do. So that's an organizational tenet, it's also a personal tenet. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to assess and reassess your experiences based on you. Not your mom or dad, your siblings, your coaches, mentors, anybody else. Assess how those experiences have shaped you toward balance, stability, confidence, or how they have potentially debased you. And then do what you can to change your perspective, to realign the perspective so that those things, you draw from those the good things. What I learned in that failure, if you're going to call it that, is that that's not a place for me. Or that I approached it in a way that sort of set me up for that failure, or something that get it in perspective, and let that be something that puts you in a position to do, well, as Eleanor Roosevelt said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Have you ever heard that before? We give our consent because sometime we have been convinced that we are in fact inferior in a certain situation. It's not fair to ourselves. It's not fair to those people who look to us as models and examples, or to lead them. Think about those things. Be trustworthy. Focus on the steps toward the change you want to see. Focus requires discipline. Discipline breeds confidence. Be consistent. True confidence is no paradox. You will know it when you see it. Humility, grace, wisdom. Thanks for sharing your morning. Questions, comments? Please.
You know, I was listening to you and I thought, well, at some point there's a point where do you involve reflection, a time for reflection on these, on yourself and where you're going and your own behaviors, right? And how often do you do that, or how do you structure that for yourself?
The question is reflection warranted? I'm paraphrasing. Warranted in looking at these characteristics, and do I do it, and how regularly? The answer is yes, and I want to answer that two ways. One is that my spiritual base is confirmed daily by reflection, by reading, by applying what I read to what I'm doing. The other way is that I assess myself, although now I use assessments enough. I know them really well, and sometimes I wonder if I'm doing them justice by just being completely a blank slate and doing them. You know what I mean? But I'll get feedback from others, and I deliver feedback on myself by filling things out, and I get some of those things. And I want to make this point in addition to your question, that I take my work very seriously. I invest myself in my clients, and I am always sensitive to making sure that the advice I give, the responses I give, are consistent with my faith. I never recommend things that are unethical, shortcuts, things that they might want to hear but really aren't the right thing. I am unpopular at times, but I think it's the right thing to do. And I would expect that if someone were able to go back through all of my work with all my clients, they would find a certain consistency because of that base. Now, am I completely confident even up here? Ask me why I have an extra pair of underwear in my briefcase. No, not necessarily. I have to reflect all the time. Thank you for your question. Claudia.
You talked about assessing your experience and then realigning yourself, and one of the difficulties that I see is that if I have reflected, I tend to be caught in my own past, I think, or I think people tend to be caught in their weaknesses, and sometimes it's hard just to realign yourself and step out of them. Do you have any practical tips, and how much would you involve other people in that?
Another great question. So in realigning or reassessing and reflecting, you can get caught into, again, I'm paraphrasing, kind of a loop of your past, and how do you break that or challenge that, and how do you use other people in that process? Is that fair? So your past is very important, obviously. Not denying it, but not getting caught in it is also important. And what I do, first of all, is you see me when I'm working with people, is I do this a lot with my hands. And this is perspective. Get back far enough from the issue to get it in perspective so you can put it in context. Your past. Let's get back from it far enough and try to look at it sort of objectively, like a third party, and get it in perspective. Does it warrant the influence that I'm giving it over my life today? And then with that confidant, and I hope all of you have confidants with whom you interact on a regular basis, you can say, you know what, every time I go through this passage, or every time I think about these things in my life, or I look at a list like this, I think, yeah, this happened to me, and ever since then I've kind of had an issue with that. I don't think it's important, or I think it still warrants a lot of attention. And if you have the right confidant in your life, you will hear either, yeah, you're right, that is big, or I don't know. What if you looked at it this way? Use those people and be as unvarnished as you can. Be transparent and be open to them, so that you build that trust connection, so that they will then give you trustworthy responses.
So you're kind of assuming a mentor or a confidant in this process, is what I hear you saying.
Am I assuming a mentor or a confidant in this process? Yes, but you and I have probably both had, or we've all had, both formal and informal mentors. And I'm talking about no one person having just one mentor. I'm talking about people who have confidants in different parts of their life, or their lives, so that you get responses and reactions from people who are best suited for that area of your life. But yes, definitely use other people, because here's the thing: rationalization is a good thing, so long as you don't do it alone. Because we can rationalize away all kinds of things that we don't like about ourselves, or we're not comfortable with. But when we include someone else, once again, if they have the guts to tell you the truth, you will hear what I just said earlier. Yeah, you're right. That's not a big deal. Or, I'm not so sure. Please.
What leaders have most inspired you in your life, and how?
What leaders have most inspired me in my life, and how? Inspired is a strong word, so I'd have to go really high on that and say, not to proselytize, but Jesus Christ is a great example, in my opinion, and some of the people who worked with him. My dad, and when I go for inspiration there, I'm talking more of influence, because there are some things about him. He's a racist. Not an abusive racist, but self-described racist. And that was a lesson for me. As I grew, I had to take all the things that I absolutely admire about the man, and I do. He's a brilliant guy, did the kinds of things I was talking about with you, achieved a lot of things, but in one area of his life, I think had a misperception that was unfortunate. Now, I could have just done what he did. And, you know, as little kids, that's what you do, right? Dad's always right. It took my own reflection, my own investigation, my own self-challenge to change that. So that I'm putting that in the context of both inspiration and maybe not so much, but that's influence. Then authors, Patrick Lencioni, who wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team and Death by Meeting, is not so much, I don't know the guy, but his writing has really helped. Jack Welch in Winning was a good example, in my opinion. Now, he's got some flaws because, I mean, you don't get to being head of GE without having this little bit of bullheadedness and drive, right? But he also has some good perspective. And then just people who did great things. I just really like people like who went to the moon or won a gold medal in the Olympics or something like that. Great question, thank you. Bob.
Ben, how do you talk about mentors a lot and how do you develop mentors and mentorees, and is it obviously important? How do you do that?
Well, mentors are, again, they can be formal or informal. Okay. Oh, great question. We better go. The way to get mentors is organically, by seeking people out who you admire, and the other way is to ask people who maybe aren't that person, but they now know that you're looking for someone who might be willing to talk to you in that regard, and then develop the relationship, but make sure it's organic. Don't try and force it. Sorry I went over time. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.